We are continuing and hopefully today completing chapter 7. This is already the 11th class on this chapter, so it's a long chapter. Probably one of the most, I can't say important because I might want to judge the level of importance in a class, but probably one of the most important classes as far as I can understand in learning of Tanya, of Shaar, Hayichud, Ve'emunah. The reason is because it addresses two topics that are the central topics of understanding Hasidus Chabad. Number one is the idea of tzimtzum, the whole contraction, the process that God created the world, the view of Hasidus that it's not kipshuto. There wasn't really a tzimtzum where God sort of in morning contracted himself completely or even a bit. It's all an appearance to us. Yesterday, I saw a little bit of a sad video. I say it's sad because it's partially comical, partially sad. There was this guy giving a class, and evidently he didn't fully understand the teachings of Chaim Volozhin. And that was the other school we talked about. The Gra felt that there was a tzimtzum kipshutai. There really was a tzimtzum. And you can't say God comes into this world because it's embarrassing to say God comes into the world. God, you think God hangs out, God forbid, in the bathroom. God has certain places, not everywhere. And this guy was trying to explain the Nefesh HaChaim, Chaim Volozhin's writings. He himself, actually, Chaim Volozhin, goes much more towards the teachings of the Alter Rebbe. He does not agree with his mentor, his teacher, the Gra. And he was explaining that it's against faith to sing the song Hashem is here. He said, how could you say Hashem is here? Hashem is everywhere. He's not everywhere. Hashem is in a shul, Hashem is in the Beis HaMikdash, Hashem is in Yerushalayim, but he's everywhere. You can't say that. That's terrible. So, of course, right away, a bunch of people came up. It was the last couple of days. A bunch of people came out with comments, and not just Chabad, but Litvisha people, other sources, like, what are you talking about? That's not what Chaim Volozhin says. Hashem is everywhere. Of course, Hashem is everywhere. So today, one of the things that we're going to accomplish, hopefully, in today's class, is explaining a certain point. How, in fact, is Hashem everywhere? Meaning, Hashem does make, again, from our perspective, contractions, and he conceals himself, he hides himself. How many filters are there until Hashem can come down into the darkest of places, or the most meaningless of places, a stone? Hashem can exist within a stone. At the same time, it's, as we said, like a turtle. We said yesterday, like the shell of a turtle, that while it's not really part of the turtle directly, it grows and it's one with the turtle. So it's interesting how you can have God's words, God's expression, that on one hand is so disconnected from God's essence, at the same time it's one with God's essence. And we have the example of a turtle or a snail that its shell grows with it, that the turtle and its shell are one. God and his words are one, even though his words are a tremendous concealment of himself. Very, very fascinating and enjoyable concept. Anyway, I thought it was interesting to see this guy's video. I'll share it with you later. It's short, it's like 1 minute. He says, how could you say Hashem is here, Hashem is there? Hashem is not everywhere. I'm like, sorry, he is. Okay. So we have today, we're going in to discuss now the process. Now that we explained that Hashem had to conceal himself. We're talking again, the second concept in this chapter that was so critical and so important is Memali and Seviv. Hashem's two general ways of interacting with the world. Either he engages and clothes himself and sort of modifies his light to fit the receiver. It modifies his energy to fit the receiver. That's Mamali. And Seviv is all-encompassing. It's just God's shining light. We can't receive it internally, but it's there. It gives us life. It's a tremendous power. And that's Seviv and Mamali. We spoke about it. Right now we're explaining how within Mamali, in the realm where God modifies, doesn't really modify, but modifies his expression, his light, his energy, his creative power to engage every physical and every spiritual being. How does that work? And that we're talking about here, the process of contractions. So we started saying that in general, within godliness, we find three areas. We find what's called God's essence. God, as he comes down in the process of what's called Seder Shtashlos the Spheres, God and Chachma, God and Bina, God and Das, etc. And then we have God, he comes down in speech. And we explain the same thing is found within a human being, that we have our soul in its essence. We have our soul in the character, in the spheros, the powers of the soul, and then our comes out in our garments like speech. We explain the same three things. So we're explaining now in the realm of speech, where God comes down, we're going to explain the Mali, God's expression and God's relationship with the world in the engaging of the world, but where's the sort of the process of God's concealment in his words. So we're taking the words that God said, let there be light, let the grass grow, The world should be these planets should be hanging in the heavens. All these expressions, where do you see the tremendous contraction? When I say contraction, I mean concealment. What's interesting is we're already starting from it's a given that we're not talking about God's essence being revealed. We're not talking about God's spheros being revealed. We're talking about God's speech, where speech is already a concealment, as we gave the metaphor in discussion last week. Within speech, in the Ten Commandments, we're going to explain how it's further and further concealed. And a lot of this, if you remember chapter 1, which is a while ago, we learned chapter 1, we're going to go back and discuss a very important discussion from chapter 1. What was that? In chapter 1, we asked a question. Chapter 1 of Shaar Hayichud V'Emunah. We asked a question. If every single thing in the world, its name defines it and creates it and gives its life, for example, God said, let there be grass. So desha, grass, its name is the source of creative and life force that it has. How does the grass exist? And how does it have a life force? It's the name that Hashem mentioned in the 10 expressions of creation. When Hashem said all the words of creation, the word grass is mentioned. We said, well, 1 second. There are many, many things not mentioned. Where is it mentioned? Cow, horse, sheep, goat, stars, or different angels. Where's all that stuff come from? So he says all that is hinted to in a process of 3 things, and we're going to talk about those 3 things. Letters within the 10 utterances could be exchanged for other letters, or could be switched with other letters, or could, as we'll see, could mean other letters. And those letters as substitutes are the ones that create it. And we'll give an example right now what that means. So we're on 4 lines from the top, right after the parentheses on page 168. Now we're talking within the 10 utterances themselves. And like I said, I'm going to try and finish till the end of this chapter. It's just that Hashem concealed and contracted the light and the life force that is able to extend and spread from God's words. And remember, words have 2 opposite realities happening. On one hand, a word is a revelation. I'm thinking something right now, a very profound, deep thought, or a very strong emotion. Imagine that. I'm thinking something very deep. So on one hand, until I speak, you don't know what I'm thinking. I could be thinking about, you look at a man, what are you thinking? Nothing, What are you thinking right now? So one is when I speak, I reveal what I'm thinking. At the same exact time, words could never fully reveal what I'm thinking, whether it's a happy thought, a complex thought, a painful thought. Words will only express a small amount of it, which means the more I speak, the more I'm concealing. It's so much more than I'm saying is what I feel. So words, while they reveal the essence, it's still concealed. It's also concealing. Hashem, his creative power that came through speech, on one hand, revealed God's essence, the power to create. At the same time, it conceals his essence, and therefore all you see is a nothingness of God's essence in this physical world.
Also, I see that with people. Some people are able to tell you what they think and express it in such a beautiful words, and some people just can't.
Right, and then so within speech itself, you have many. The spectrum is huge within speech itself, as we're going to see in a second. How within speech it could be concealment and concealment and concealment. But you're right. Some people have a tremendous gift and they can express much more what's going on in their heads, which is one of the tragedies of some brilliant people, that they can't communicate properly. They don't know how to teach a class. And it's a challenge because they're brilliant. There was a famous, forget his name right now, brilliant scholar in Israel, very famous, that he was an author, but he didn't communicate well. But he was a brilliant scholar off the charts. Welcome back from Israel. Welcome. So we're here on page 168. So this is the first thing. How do we get them? It's in the letters that are formed from the Asara Amaris. So we're going to go here 3 ways where the letters in the 10 utterances, Asara Amaris, could say things that's not really said there. One way is letter selection. What does that mean? I want to create, for an example, I'll just make one up. I want to create stone. So I'll take an aleph from here, a beis from here, a nun from here. I got the word Evan. Boom. I found in the 10 utterances the word Evan. Now, we can't decide that. That's how God did it. We can't choose how it's found. God had different methods for each thing that he created, whether he used method 1, 2, or 3, as we'll see. But one method is called sirufay, that Hashem, because he set all the letters, the 22 letters in the aleph beis, So any word that he wants is really there. You just got to know how to find and collect the right letters. That's called tzirufim, putting together, collecting. And also a collection of a collection. How is that done? That means another way is when you exchange letters. There are many, many ways. We spoke about this, if you remember, in chapter 1, how a letter could be exchanged. One way to exchange it is because it has a concept called atbash. An aleph is interchangeable with a tuf, a beis with a shin. Those are givens. Those letters are interchangeable. Or all the letters that come from the throat, gimel, ches, hey, aleph, we can interchange those. Or we have all different rules which letters can be interchanged with each other. So those are called chilufim, letters that can be exchanged with another letter. So sometimes, now, what's the difference? If you're doing the letters being collected, tzirufim, compiling a letter, that means you have the actual letter themselves, that the light itself found within the letter is unchanged. But if you're going to go now chilufim, you're not having the original letter anymore. We said before about the word echad and the word va'ed are the same exact three letters, except they're all interchanged. The aleph and a vav come together. The ches and an ayin both come from the throat. And the daled, one's a big, one's a small. Again, they're exchanged. So in the Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, Baruch Shem to va'ed, those two words can be interchanged. But those are interchanged with chilufim. Chilufim means a much lesser amount of light. So once we're doing an exchange of a letter, that means whatever we're creating with this power is a much lesser infused with godliness than the good morning, than words that were created just with extracting letters from different places. And then you have another thing called cheshbon, gematria. This word has, now in gematria itself, there's many types of gematrias. One type of gematria is, it's amazing, is that the word, for an example, I don't know, the word ma, memhei, 45, another word that has the same word, like for example, the word adam, also 45, there's a connection between ma and adam. Okay, so the same numerical value. Another way is, you could say how many letters this word has. This word has 5 letters, okay, that's an exchange. But that's, of course, oh wow, that was a tricky one. But the bottom line is, if Hashem chose to create with that process, what does he mean? I use a very dumbed down process of exchanging, which means what we're actually getting in the recipient is a very minimized and diminished level of light that was infused in the first original letters of creation, what's actually being created with this product, with this exchange of letters or gematria or etc. And now we're going to explain those levels very, very detailed. To understand, and we'll get our point is to explain how through Mamali, where God modifies his energy as is received in the world to each recipient, this is the process found within the 10 utterances that Hashem used to create the world. So let's see this inside. Okay. Let's look at the first word in line, shekol chiluf. It's about 10 lines down. First word is shekol. Shekol chiluf utamura. Every time you do an exchange of a letter, it shows al yuridas ha'chayas, a diminishing of the light, a diminishing of the life force. Mimadrega lemadrega. Whenever we do an exchange of letters, so let's say the word was one. Let's say it was chalif, and we change it over to whatever it's going to be exchanged for that, whether it's atbash or the process. The final resulting word is a much more diminished in light and in life, both things, life force. Madrega going down, and again, depending which method we use, if it's exchanged because atbash, it's exchanged because they're both made from the same part of your throat. Is it exchanged because whatever the reason might be we're exchanging it? All those reasons, each one has another level of disconnect. We can create all different creations and give life to creations. That the level of its quality and its greatness, and it's much less the light, the energy that's found in words created and things created. Like let's take the word sus. It doesn't say anywhere in the 10 utterances the word sus, which is horse. That means the way it was created, the process, whichever one it was, is a diminished one because all it came out was a horse. If it would have come out an angel, or would have come out with water or fire, which are powerful things, and water is actually written in the 10 Commandments, Mayim, but more than once, because Mayim is such a powerful source of light. It's the richest nutrient of life in the world is Mayim. It's infused with godliness in an incredible way. So things that are written in a concealed way obviously have much less divine light, or much more contractions and concealment, the divine light that created that being. Compared to those things that are written clearly in the 10 utterances, that Hashem directly unfiltered himself and is inserting himself in this. And again, we're talking now already not God's essence, not God's spheres, but God's dibur. But within the dibur itself, it's God's essence infused in an unfiltered way compared to the lower levels. Which is God's midos, God's chesed, God's kindness that he infused into those directly, into those things directly mentioned in the 10 utterances. Now, in the next level is when we do gematria, we do number matchings. We say, the word behema has the same numerical value as this word, so therefore it has this. It can be exchanged for those letters in the Saramaris. When we do calculations, we're talking about a diminishing of light, and of life in more diminished ways. That means you only have the smallest, most insignificant amount of godliness imbued and infused in this created being, because it was created with such a diminished amount that it wasn't just tzirufim and it wasn't just chilufim, but it's a cheshbon. For an example, imagine I say, what the similarity between I don't know what you want to say, between horses and angels are? There's 10 of each. You take 10 worms and 10 diamonds. What's the similarity? 10. That's not really such a big similarity. Obviously, when you go to an amount of something, it's a very huge diminishing of transferring of similarity from one to the other, which means the amount of light coming from the Asar Amaris into these things, which are only matching because of the same numerical value, is very small compared to if it's exchange of letters or if it's actual letters themselves that are just reorganized like a Bagel. You can find the word. Imagine playing Bagel and you say, for that one, also the B could also be an L or a G, and the R could also be a Z or a Y. What is this? Well, that's what we're doing here. So one level is we play Bagel. As long as you can find a way to connect them, that's good enough. One is I'm allowed to change any one on that dice. It could be any of those letters. Another one is any letter that has, it's such a distant leap from the original. It shows on these are reflecting the diminished light and godliness that's going into those created beings. All you're doing is saying the number of something which is similar to something that was in the Saramaris directly. It's a very diminished light. Now, after all these particular contractions and concealments that Hashem decreed, why did Hashem decree that this thing should be made like this and this like that? That was God's thing. It's not like there's a logic we can understand. It makes sense why we wanted to create a horse, he did it this way. We wanted to create a cow, he did it this way. These are God's decrees, how God made it, what's called holy, what's called spiritual. We can't determine what's spirituality in the world. God determines it, but everything has that spirituality, some in a very concealed way. What do we see meanwhile? That some things in the world, the light may come in a tremendously concealed way, but it's still the same source. It's the same exact source. I was listening to a talk from Yael Khan. He was explaining just an example of chilufim. He says, if you want to understand the difference between chilufim and the stage before it, which is tzirufim, one is just selecting letters, and one is exchanging letters for similar letters. He says it's like the difference between the sun that shines and reflects off the moon. The light that shines off the moon is a completely different light than the sunlight that comes from the sun. While it's the same source, the whole way the moonlight shines to us and how we see it and how it appears to us is unbelievably different. Once it's absorbed and reflected from the moon, it's a different light coming to us. He said, unlike the sun, when it shines, you could have the sun diminished also by distance, by the amount of things that's particles found in the air, the ozone layer. You could have it shining through a window, through a curtain, through a thicker glass. But at the end of the day, sunlight and moonlight are very different. Sunlight comes in, it's a whole different light. Even if it's coming in through a curtain, through a window, through stained glass, you can't compare sunlight to moonlight. So while sunlight could be diminished by many things that get in the way and block and conceal some of the light, whether it's distance, whether it's physical items blocking, none of those are as diminished as the light from the moon. Light from the moon is a cool light. It's not even warmth. You're not going to put your hand, in the window. He doesn't say this in this class, but I was thinking about this. You put your hand in a window the sun shining through a curtain. Your hand there, after a few minutes, you'll feel your hand very warm. It's coming through all different things. You're never going to feel the warmth of the sun coming off the moon. And the distance is not that much of a distance. We're talking about millions of miles away. It's nothing, the distance. It's just a different type of light. When it comes from the moon, it's no longer that which was sunlight. Of course, it's the only source we have is sunlight. There's nothing else to have a source of light. No, the moon doesn't have its own inner energy power. One day it will. Mashiach comes. But right now, the light that comes is only sunlight. Yet it has nothing in common with the sunlight in any of its characteristics. The same thing is true. He says a difference between the first stage of tzirufim, selecting original letters and exchanging them to form a new word, like Bagal style, or chilufim, when you exchange a letter and you turn the letter around to make it become a different letter. Now we're talking about a whole different level. And then certainly when you go to the next level, when we're coming to just use numbers, it's the same amount, oh, that's great. So we have 10 people here and 10 people there. Okay, it's the same. There's nothing in common. These 10 and those 10 happens to be what do we have in common? 10. It's a similarity. You could say there's a number that matches. We use it in halacha. We use it in certain things to say that because they have the same numerical value, it means something, but it's a very diminished sort of relationship compared to when there's actual qualities. Okay, so now, once Hashem made all these decrees and chose what things should have what level of light, what level of life force, now, okay, to Hashem goes, now Hashem's life force could not only come and shine into angels, not only into man, not only into people and the plants, not only into animals, but even a rock, even a stone, even a lifeless, inanimate object has godliness in it, but makes it both, as we'll see soon, not just exist, but gives it life. And we'll have to explain what life means by a stone. Ki even derech mashal. Now he's going to give a very interesting example of something fascinating here. I'll have to give a little background information just before we start. Hashem's name, Yud K Vav K, has 4 different ways you could spell it. What does it mean you could spell it? Obviously, it's only spelled Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey. But each of those, when we want to spell out the word, so Yud could be spelled Yud, Vav, Daled, spells the letter Yud. Just like you want to spell out the letter, I don't know, in English, W. How do you spell it? You make a Double. You write out a letter. You can write out each letter of the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey differently. The Yud is always spelled Yud Vav Dalet, never changes. That's the essence, unchanging. The Yud is always spelled Yud Vav Dalet. But the rest of the 3 letters can be spelled different ways. For example, one way is to spell it with Heys. Hey, Hey spells the letter Hey. Vav is spelled Vav, Vav. And Hey again spelled Hey, Hey. Another way is with Aleph. Hey is spelled Hey, Aleph. Vav is spelled Vav, Aleph, Vav. And then Hey again is spelled Hey, Hey Aleph. Another way is with the Yud. Hey is spelled Hey Yud. Vav is Vav Yud Vav. Again, there's 4 ways to do it. Each way you do it comes up to a different number. One way will come to number 45 if you use Alephs. If you use Vavs, it comes up to be 52. If you use Yuds, it becomes up to, and there's 4 different ways. Either 45, 52, 63, or 72. If you study a lot of Hasidus, you know these 4 numbers are very specific numbers. Why? God has 4 names that we use for expression and power creation. It's called Shem Ma, Shem Ban, Shem Sag, and Shem Av. These 4 different formations of Ban, or let's go, Ban's the lowest, but Ma, Ban, going in numerical order. Ma is 45, Ban is 52, Sag is 63, and Av is 72. These are codes of God's different, you ever hear God's name of 72, God's name of 45? That's what it's referring to. How you spell the final 3 letters of Yud K Vav K. The Yud always spelled Yud Vav Dalet, always. So the lowest of them is called Ban. Beis Nun, which also has the same numerical value, by the way, the word Behema. The word Behema is spelled equals 52. The word Adam, as you mentioned before, equals 45. And it has to do with Man, Ban in general, is very much, those 2 names are discussed a lot in the Chassidus. The other 2 names of Sag and Av is less often in the Chassidus that we usually learn, but Man, Ban is discussed a lot. It's the masculine and the feminine. It's a lot of discussion. He's going to say the word stone has within it the name Ban. Ban is the final two letters of the word Ben, for that matter. Beis Nun is the lowest of God's four compacted names. And that represents a stone that on one hand is created from the lowest of the low, at the same of God's names, and has at the same time, it's one of God's names. The energy is from a source. So the word Evan is going to explain has within it its numerical value equal to the lowest of God's four of those Kabbalistic names of Ma, Ban, Av, and Sag, or Sag and Av. Okay, let's see this inside. Let's say, for an example, Ki Evan derech mashal Shema, its name. Moira shows Ki Sharsha mishem ha'ola ban b'misparei. The word Evan, because it has the base and the nun in it, it shows that it comes from the name of God that has the numerical value of 52. The Eid Aleph Noisefis, and it has another Aleph. Mishem, and you have to hear it says as a type, not a typo, but a transcript mistake that was done throughout the generations. It has to be Latam. It's interesting that in this exchange of letters is an exchange of letters itself. I'm sure there's some Kabbalistic reason why this particular word Latam was spelled by mistake with a shin when we're discussing exchanges of letters. Just interesting. I don't know any insight into that. Just interesting.
Maybe because you write Steve.
Yeah, though. So the fact that it can be exchanged, we know why. They're similar shaped letters. The tes and the shin is similar shaped in the handwritten. But the fact that divine providence made that while we're talking about letter exchanges, there's an accidental, so to speak, letter exchange in Tanya that had to be corrected by the original transcriber is very interesting. But in any case, the Rebbe has a question here, which is discussed. I heard this from Rabbi Elkan again. He says like this. He says, Aleph that came from somewhere else. Where is that somewhere else? So Chassidus explains that somewhere else is the name Ma. It has one Aleph, as we said before, the name Ma is spelled with Hayes. Hey Aleph, Vav, Aleph, Vav. So the Aleph of Evan, so it's not just Ben, it's Evan. The Aleph came from Shem Ma, and it came down to draw down an infusion of light from a higher name, etc. So the Rebbe says, why doesn't the Alter Rebbe say that? Why does he just say that it came from another place? So he says because there's a second opinion that says the Aleph didn't come from Shem Ma. The Aleph came from somewhere else, called Is Evan, two levels of Evan itself. It came from the higher level of Evan. So because the two interpretations, he doesn't say where it came from. But the general understanding is that it came from the Aleph of the name Ma, and that's the, as you said, when you spell out the God's name, the letter spelled out, Hey Aleph would be an Aleph in the name of Ma that equals 45. Okay, what's the bottom line you see here? He's showing him parenthetically that even the names and even the numerical values of each name, of each word, of each created being has a relationship to which name of God it comes from, which description, which expression of godliness, and the Evan comes from the lowest. And even the name Ban, don't think the Shem Ban is some low little thing. While it comes to create stones, it's not some low level guy. Shem Ban, that's God's essence in his name, Havaya, as expressed in its deepest Kabbalistic or mystical, whatever that is. I don't even know what to describe it. It's the highest of the high. It's just that through that, Hashem was able to bring it down through the tzimtzumim, through the levels, to come down to actually create a stone. But actually, tzimtzumim is through tremendous concealments, contractions. From level to level, yorad mimenu. It came down a very, very minimal light until even a stone. What are we getting from here? You could say Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere. Because every single thing in the world is infused with the essence of God that's carried within. Almost, it's a very bad metaphor, but I have to use what's in my head, which is sometimes scary, and that is the babushka dolls. At the end of the day, even if you get that giant babushka doll, somewhere inside is a tiny little core one. Meaning the package that you're getting of the stone, in it is Shem Ban, from Shem Ma, from this, from that. By the time you get to the top, it's godliness itself infused the essence. We see just a stone. A tzaddik doesn't see the stone. Why? Because the whole concealment is only compared to our eyes. If you're a tzaddik doesn't have that concealment, I'm talking about a tzaddik like, some righteous. I'm talking about a holy tzaddik, Rabbi Akiva. I'm talking about, the Alter Rebbe, the Baal Shem Tov, people who lived and saw a different reality, didn't see the physical dimensions of the world alone. They saw that, not alone. So there in that world, you see the truth. It's like a receiver that can see the radio waves. You see the truth is radio waves, so I can't see them because my eyes can't pick up radio waves, but an antenna can. The someone who can see the truth knows that what's in the stone is pure godliness. There's nothing there besides godliness. The way it appears to us. It's like I just read a story a couple of days ago about this person who was getting towards the end of his life, and he told his son, I reached a point that I'm no longer physical. I no longer have any physical dimensions to myself. I'm purely spiritual, my whole existence. So his son taps him, and he said, but I feel a physical body. He says, because you're tapping with physical hands. He said, of course you're going to feel it. It's like, someone says, I want you to feel the amazing texture of this material, but you're wearing a heavy, coarse construction glove filled with gravel. And you go, I don't understand. It feels rough. No kidding. Take off the glove and you'll feel the silk. Meaning you're experiencing it through your gloves. Of course you're going to see it. There's a reality and a truth that's there that we can't see. So he's telling us how is it able to come down into this physical expression? Because of the tzimtzumim, the atzumim, the many, many levels of concealment. That's the point you want to say here. The whole point of this last page and a half of chapter 7 is to explain how is Memali, how does this level of engagement with the world in a way that engage and clothe itself in the world actually take place? And the answer is concealment, concealment, concealment. Like they used to say certain things, how do they make the best army of the Israelis? 3 things: training, training, training. You have to have 3 things: concealment, 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 and that allows there eventually to be a world that we can engage and that we live today. And even the evil people, even the terrible people, even the things in the world that are bad, are evil, are no good, is all coming from the same source. Just sometimes the concealment is so strong that their entire existence is so fragile, and the only reason why things that are evil seem to have a strong existence is because we allow it. Or we give them strength by engaging with them, by using them, by giving them excitement and encouragement, and meaning we are strengthening all the physical, all the impure, unholy things in the world when we engage them. And I mean engage them to fight them. I mean to say, hey, it's a cool thing. It's something to be scared of, something to be impressed with. That gives them more kayach. But Hashem created them, as we said at the beginning in chapter 7, 8, 9, with the most minimal amount of life force, and they're so fragile. If we would just recognize that, there wouldn't be any challenges in the world. Okay. Coming to the bottom of this page, and this is the spirit of the stone, or daimon really means inanimate, that gives it life and makes it exist gives it life and makes it exist every single moment, from nothing to something. And Tamar pointed out, what do you mean gives it life? So there's different insights that I saw. What does it mean give life to a stone? A stone doesn't have life. When you see a plant has some sort of life. An animal has some sort of life. What do you mean? I understand you make it exist. Some things exist and some things have a life. Where do you see the life of a stone? So one of the things that I saw is that a stone life doesn't mean its function like it moves around or breathes, even though you could find out stones, over time, whatever happens to them but there's really, what it means is its character, its nature. The life of a stone is its character, its nature. Its nature is to be solid. Its nature is that you could split it. It's a hard thing, and a blunt force could split it. All the characteristics that make up a stone, because other things that are also inanimate have a different nature. Water and a stone are both inanimate, but one has nature to flow. One could be freeze and change in the weather. It's whatever, it becomes hard, cold, hard or soft. Whereas a rock remains a rock, and its character is that it could be split by such a method, etc. Like a diamond, there are ways to cut it and facet. Meaning every single thing in the world has its nature, its character. That's what we're talking about. That gives and maintains it. As we see, there are times Hashem changes the character. When He split the sea, the water changed its character. It still existed, but now my character was to sit upright. There are times that other things changed. Things that don't usually floated. Stones lifted up, or the Aaron carried the Jews across the Jordan, the Kohanim. There are different times that nature could change, but the nefesh refers to the nature. All of the above is true about Mamali, that it modifies and conforms to fit and be received by each created being that it creates, each created receiver. Whereas Sev Kalman doesn't change. It is a makif, it is all-encompassing, overwhelming, and non-engaging type of life force. The kol kayach, top of next page, the last few lines of the chapter. The kol kayach umadrega, and every single power and every single level, yachal livrei bruyim kefi bechinis madrega zu, meaning as these letters of the 10 utterances are exchanged, and are modified or are used as a collection of letters, whatever method we use, are able to create things and things within that realm, meaning certain things create animals, certain things create plants, certain things create things that are able to reproduce. Everything creates something which is within the level of light that was transmitted from the original letters of the 10 utterances. And not just they can create them, it's endless amount of stones. Even though its quality will be limited to a certain type of quality, that meaning when you have this level of a letter being exchanged, let's say by a numerical value, and now it could only be a stone. But this power of creation that Hashem used in the 10 utterances, while it can't create more than a stone, but it can create endless amount of stones. And not just amount of stones, types of stones. Stones that are valuable, stones that are semi-precious, stones that are used for burning fuel. All different types of stones can be created, items, which could be used so many different ways, but it can't go out of that level. But within that level, it can create all different types, all different endless types of stones. Bekamusam in its amount, unlimited, veichusam and its type. It's meaning the type of stone. Not just is going to be a sandstone. It could also be I'm not going to start naming stones, but all different stones. Yeah, the quality means here the type of stone, meaning not just thousands and millions of stones, but also types of stones. Eichos, the type of stone that is. It could be the size of the stone, but it could also be the type of stone. Endless. Why is that? Why is it endless? Why could it create an endless amount, infinite amount, theoretically? It's because at the end of the day, the force of power in this creative force is Hashem's essence. So while it's true that it's coming down a diminished way, but because we're talking about the power we're using here as God's creative power, is the 10 utterances, and they're just modified, so to be received even by a stone. But it's still the infinite nature is there, and it can create any amount. And there's no stopping it, meaning it can go endless amount of creations. But one thing, because we had these exchanges, whether it's Sirufim, like collecting letters, whether Chilufim exchanging letters, whether Gematria just using numerical value, the bottom line is the level of light was diminished. So you're never going to have from this combination of words created something better than itself. You're not going to have from this that can create a stone, suddenly create a giraffe, or suddenly create a planet, or suddenly create an angel. Because once it was diminished, it only can create within that realm of creative abilities, which in this case will be inanimate items. It will never be able to create things that the letters themselves were able to create, which means the power force, or the force of power that creates and is created by the combination of letters exchanges, now has an ability to create things that were not mentioned at all in the Asar Mamaris. Nevertheless, while you can create to the same level that would by the words directly mentioned. So the word mayim, or any words that's mentioned directly in Asar Zadibra, in the Asar Mamaris, and the 10 utterances, they're connected, by the way. Anything created in the 10 utterances, those have an unusual, special, not just because there's 10. That's also a similarity. Anything that's created with the actual words found in the 10 utterances has a much greater, much more powerful, and much more undiluted life force from God that can create. Now, that's a separate discussion, which I don't know enough about to try and figure out, like things that I mentioned there, what do we see unique about it? Water, obviously, is easier to see. Mayim is extraordinary. We find many, many things in Chassidus that Mayim is unique from everything else, from every other creative thing. It can transform a person. It changes someone from impurity to purity, from non-Jewish to Jewish. It can give you life to live. It carries nutrients throughout the body. The Rebbe goes in length, the power and the greatness of water. That's why water is so dangerous. Water is dangerous because the more, just as a side note, the more something has a life force, the more attractive it is to the forces of impurity. Why is that? Imagine a person is a very, very poor person, and he has nothing, and he doesn't have scruples, doesn't have values. His goal is, who has the most money I can steal from? He's not going to steal from his neighbor who's poor too. He's going to go into a place where there's money, whether it's a bank, whether you saw somebody carrying a lot of jewelry or a lot of cash. That's the target. You see a lot of money, it's a bigger target. Impurities, they're made extremely fragile. Hashem created them with the most basic, least amount of life force to exist, because they're just needed for technical purposes. But they see tremendous life force in water. That's why if you look halachically, anything with water or liquids have a whole different laws of impurity. For an example, for a fruit to become tamei, it has to get wet at least once. If a fruit never got wet, it can't become tamei. Same thing is water left uncovered overnight has much more limitations and problematic things than any other food left overnight uncovered. Why? Because there's an attraction to water, to the rich source of life that's found within the water.
Salt also.
What?
Salt also shouldn't be uncovered.
Yeah, that's not the same reason. It also has other qualities, but water is unique in its unbelievable energy. And the Rebbe says the same thing in general about a Jew. We're a great attraction. The holier, not just a Jew, the holier you are as a Jew, the holier person you are, the bigger attractant you are to impurities. That means the righteous people like Avraham, Yitzchak, they had children that ended up going into Yishmael and Esav. Why? They're the richest. This is what Klippa wants. Klippa wants when they came in the times of the Midian to go and try and bring the women of Midian to sin. Who was their target? Moshe Rabbeinu. They try and get Moshe Rabbeinu to sin. That was the whole story with Cosby and that girl was supposed to be set aside, God forbid, for Moshe. But of course, they didn't know what Moshe was. But that was their target, was Moshe Rabbeinu. They target always the holiest thing. So the Rebbe says it seems like it's not fair. The holier you are, the more you're a target for impurity. The more they're after you. This is all the clippers are after you. So that brings us an interesting law when it comes to fruit becoming tamei. It has to get wet. But there's one way you could never ever become tamei. While the fruit is attached to its tree, you could put on it every type of dead creature you want, anything you want that can't become tamei, as long as it's connected to its source. The Rebbe says you want to make sure you never get impure. Be connected to your source. As long as you're connected to your source, you have a connection. No impurity in the world can touch you. So yes, you're an attractive target, but not if you're connected to your source. You're untouchable. Anyway, this is the end of chapter 7. The tremendous concealment and process that we go in creation to get from God's essence into a final product of physical being.